All right. Action. Cut. All right, we need to start over. Just a little word humor for you this morning. Good times. All right. So, we've talked about a lot of these areas before. But we're going to talk about them again. Okay. So over here is your brain, okay? And then you've got your brainstem and you got your spinal cord. So this is a flow chart of how information goes from one brain area to the next to eventually your spinal cord and then to your muscles to move, right? So we're actually specifically talking about movement, okay? And acting in an environment or on an environment, right? And so this is like chapter 7 or something like that, or chapter 8. And so we probably would have discussed it quite early if I had gone in order. And so you're probably familiar with most of these areas now. There's a lot of pictures of brains to share. Like I said, I really wish I had Brian, but, you know, it is what it is. It's just, Brian's going to get very dusty. I might go to campus over the summer to make sure everything's okay. And Brian's, you know, getting watered, that sort of thing. So here are the brain areas that we are going to focus on today. We've got the prefrontal cortex and the parietal cortex. In those areas, you have the premotor and supplementary motor cortex. The premotor, and the SMA, is generally speaking what it's called. We've got the cerebellum, which is the cauliflower bits and underneath your occipital lobes. Okay, we've got the basal ganglia, which we talked about extensively the other day, right? The big loopy bit in the medial portion of your cortex. Okay. That all talks to the motor cortex. Motor cortex is what sends information either to your brainstem, your spinal cord, or both. But the cerebellum also does that because the cerebellum is associated with coordination of movement. So you have a lot of information coming from the motor cortex into the spinal cord to move, but then you also have like your hands and your limbs and your legs, and you need to walk and you need to, you know, do your I'm gonna jog right now. Woo, so your cerebellum needs to coordinate all of that movement coming into the spinal cord, like one leg in front of the other, which is why you can't do it immediately upon birth, right? If somebody was just like, yo, this is how you walk, okay? This is how you walk. And you're like, okay, I get it now. I'm going to walk. Deep. No. You need to learn that implicitly. And then cerebellum helps with that coordination of like one foot in front of the other, so on and so forth, right? This information is written in this specific way because it represents the hierarchy of control. Okay, so at the very top of the hierarchy, you have the prefrontal cortex and parietal cortexes initiating movement. Premotor gets information from those places, and the cerebellum to start the coordination. You need basal ganglia to help you with the movements. All of that information then goes to the motor cortex, and then so on. And so at the bottom of the control hierarchy is the spinal cord, okay? And we're going to specifically go through the spinal cord and what it means to be a, basically a motor neuron, okay? So here we have your bicep / tricep, okay? This looks to be the left arm. Yeah, looks like it's the left arm. And so the information is actually coming from the right hemisphere. All of the places that we just talked about, most of that information is coming from the right hemisphere because we're talking about the left arm. Okay, so let's specifically talk about the bicep, because that's what this example is showing you. Okay, so within the muscle fibers, you have motor neurons connected at various points within the hierarchy of muscle fibers. As we have a dense bundle of fibers, and these muscle fibers are then connected to these what are called alpha motor neurons. Alpha motor neurons. Effector muscles carry information from the muscles to the central nervous system. Okay? Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. It carries neural impulses to the central nervous system. So those are the effectors that we're going to talk about. Okay? Alpha motor neurons communicate with the muscle fibers using the neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. Okay? Acetylcholine. This tells your muscles to twitch. Okay? And that twitching in a coordinated fashion becomes contractions. Okay, so that's what alpha motor neurons do. Acetylcholine gets transmitted to the muscles to make them contract. And so this is what you see, yes, Golden Duke, in this electrical information. By attaching an EMG, an electromyogram, to the arm, one on the underside of the arm for the tricep and one on the top side of the arm. There's more than one, but you get what I'm saying. For the bicep, and your bicep and tricep are antagonistic muscle groups. Okay, so when one is relaxed, the other is contracted, and when the other is contracted, then the first one is relaxed. Okay, so you can see here that when you extend your arm, okay, you have arm extension, your tricep is actually contracted. And so there's that burst of electrical activity when you extend your arm out, right? And it may not feel like it's extended. So if you're doing this with me right now, it may not feel like it's extended because you're pushing on it and you're like, well, that doesn't feel like it's extended or contracted at all. It actually is. It is. It's pulling up. It's essentially pulling up your elbow. Okay, you can kind of feel, if you flex it completely, you can kind of feel the tendon that's attached to the muscle flex at the elbow when you kind of pop it. Don't hyperextend your elbow. Please don't do that. So that's when, and then so when you pull your arm in, that's when the bicep. Look at that bicep. That bicep contracts, and then you can see here that is active, right? And so for the bicep and tricep, extending your arm, that's called extension. When flexing your arm, that's called flexion. We also have two additional places where this occurs on our limbs. We have our thighs. We have the flexor and extensor for our knee, right? So we have a quadriceps, and we have our hamstrings. And then for our ankle, which we have the extensor in the front, and the calf muscles in the back. Okay, for the ankle. Okay, so those are the groups of flexors and extensors, which is cool. Now, two other things on here that I wanted to mention are gamma motor neurons. Okay, gamma motor neurons are connected to your reticular formation. Okay, this set of neurons controls muscle tone. Okay, so how dense is the muscle fiber. So that information gets sent to the reticular formation to make sure that your muscles are toned appropriately to handle the movements and to handle your skeleton, right? To handle your body shape and to handle being able to move that body shape, okay? And then the last vocab term here is spinal interneurons. These are neurons that are in the spinal cord. Hence, what? They're situated inside the spinal cord to receive information and send information to the motor neurons that are all throughout your body and the brain, right? So they act as intermediaries. We're talking long-ass axons, especially the motor neurons that are down in your feet, right? They are coming up a very long way, but they can't go all the way, okay? And so once they get to the spinal cord, they pass on the information to specialized interneurons that then send the information upward to the brain, okay? So let's explore this a little bit more with your with how interneurons work with reflexes and your knee. Okay, reflexes and your knee. We can talk about reflexes because it shows you the entire path of the motor neurons and the sensory neurons. What is an alpha motor neuron versus what is an interneuron, versus what's going up, what's going down, that sort of thing. This is a little simplified because, and the important thing to know about reflexes is that they don't require your brain at all, which is great. They just require a sensory neuron, a interneuron, and an alpha motor neuron, okay? And various points of digest in the spinal cord, right? So you've been to the doctor, okay? You've been to the doctor, and you've likely gotten your knee reflex tested. Some people have the reflex that is, I'm going to kick the doctor in the nuts. That's why they stand to the side, okay, when they do it. A little reflex humor for you all. And then some people don't have it very much at all. It's basically you got to hit the sweet spot of it, okay? And so this is a knee extensor reflex, right? This is a leg extensor reflex. Okay, so when the doctor taps your knee, the quadriceps, which is your thigh muscle, which is the meaty part of the front of your thigh. I'm touching it, but it's not on camera, so I don't know why I'm touching it. It helps me, I guess. This stretch triggers receptors in the muscle. So this is the quadriceps femoris. It's on your femur. That triggers this muscle spindle, which is a stretch receptor. That is a sensory neuron that sends information to the dorsal root of your spinal cord. The dorsal root is the back. So where this is the back, this is your back, this is your front, right? Because when we talk about dorsal, we're talking about top, right? And so that dorsal fin, so imagine if you were a marine mammal, you'd have a dorsal fin on your back. So that's why dorsal is used for the back here. I know when we talk about the brain, this is the dorsal fin, right? And this is the ventral fin. But on the spinal cord, it's slightly flipped if you were walking on all fours, right? So that's why that's the case. So that sensory neuron goes into the dorsal root, gets connected to an interneuron. That interneuron then tells an alpha motor neuron coming out of the ventral spinal cord to tell the to contract. Okay? So basically like, oh my god, contract. Go upward. Go upward. Okay? So it activates a motor neuron to contract the quadriceps. So tapping on the knee isn't so much about the patella at all, or the ligaments that connect the patella to the shin bone coming down, the fibula. I think that's the fibula, right? I don't know. I don't remember. And the other tendons that attach it to the femur or the quadriceps here. The tap is to activate this stretch receptor. Okay? So when your knee is at rest, so is your quadricep. But when you get tapped, it sends a vibration all the way up through your quadricep. That sensation tells the alpha motor neuron, kick. And so you kick. Isn't that cool? That's cool. No brain involved. No brain whatsoever. Okay? Why do we have this reflex? Does anybody want to take a guess as to why we have this reflex? Faster response. That's not a bad answer. Fight or flight running. That's not a bad answer too, Austin. Don't forget to say something in chat, Austin. I don't know if I've missed any days with you, but sometimes you don't say anything in chat. It's not a bad. That's not a fight or flight running. Okay, it's not bad. If you have the slides, the answer's in there. I didn't actually remove them. It's not something that is discussed when we talk about reflexes, or why your doctor is tapping on your knee to make sure you have this function. Like, I don't even know if your doctor, when he taps on the knee, is like, oh yeah, so this is why I do it. I'm testing your reflexes. But why are you testing my reflexes? What's the point of testing my reflexes? So I see nobody else is answering. So how dare you all? It's to maintain posture, actually. So we're bipedal. This reflex is incredibly important to maintain posture because it's a feedback system. Okay, it's a feedback system when you're walking. Because when you strike the ground, vibration goes up through the leg, right? And so if you don't have this feedback system, you'll probably crumple to the ground. Okay, so that's what this reflex is for. Maintaining posture as a bipedal organism. Because I doubt you can tap on a dog's knee and have them, like, kick out their leg. Because their legs don't work like that. Because they're quadrupedal. We have to maintain an upright posture, and one of the ways that we do that are our gigantic thigh muscles. Right? Of course, also our back muscles and our butt muscles, the gluteus maximus, of course. Your glutes. Don't forget leg day. Don't forget squat day. Okay? So this feedback system helps us maintain an upright posture. That's why we have this reflex. And the next time you're at a doctor and they tap on your knee, ask them, why are you testing my knee like this, sir? Or ma'am? I wonder. Do I know something you don't know? And then you can, they'll kick you out of the office because they're like, we don't like know-it-alls here. I'm sorry, I still have to talk to you like a baby because you don't know anything about your own life. Yeah. So moving up into the brain, because we're done with reflexes, moving up into the brain, we end up, we want to explore how the spinal cord then connects to various brain areas. And we are going to explore the brain here in just a smidge longer, and just a smidge. Okay. So imagine we have these cuts. Okay, we have this coronal cut. Okay, and then we have these transverse cuts or horizontal cuts to the spinal cord. So these this coronal cut to the brain, and then these transverse, slightly slanted transverse cuts on the spinal cord. You can see here what pyramidal or extrapyramidal tracts are. So the pyramidal tract goes from the spinal cord up into the motor cortex / back. Okay, so the motor cortex sends information down into the pyramidal tract. Okay, the brain innervates the spinal cord via the pyramidal and extrapyramidal tract. Corticospinal. So you can also consider the pyramidal tract as the cortical spinal tract as well. Because then because this is the only one that's pyramidal. Now you'd have to specify your extrapyramidal tracts because there are 4 of them, but we'll go through all of them. Okay, so the pyramidal one originates in the motor cortex and terminates in the spinal cord. Almost all of these fibers, all over the contralateral side of the medullary pyramids. That's why it's called pyramids, because these things look a bit like pyramids. Okay, and so you can see here that on the left side of the brain, we end up on the right side of the body. Okay, this is, I don't know if it's helpful to you, but this is ventral and this is dorsal. You can kind of tell by the spinal cord if you look at these like kind of wavy bits here, these wavy bits. That's the dorsal part, right? So that's your dorsal fin. Cuckoo! There we go. I don't know why I made that sound. But you can see that is contralateral, right? Because we're ipsilateral for a little while, all the way through the midbrain and medulla. But then in the medulla, that's when you cross over. Okay? As we talked about earlier in the semester. You cross over in the medulla, and then you're contralateral all the way down. Okay? The extrapyramidal tracts actually originate in the midbrain, and some either stay ipsilateral, or they do bilateral, or they go contralateral. Okay, so let's talk about what these individual ones are. Okay, so here is the right red nucleus. Here's the right red nucleus. Is that the right? No, that's the left. I don't know why that says right. So that's the red nucleus. That goes contralateral to the same place as the motor cortex goes, okay? That's called the rubrospinal. Okay, rubrospinal. The superior colliculus, which we have discussed already. Hi, Elsbells. Come on. Why are you saying come on so loudly? Come on! Damn, girl. You got dressed.
Yeah, I brought her.
Good times. Alright, have fun. She's trying to run away.
Oh. So we're in the face next, and then we go. Elliot! Alright, when we're taking you away. We're taking something away.
No! Don't, Mommy!
Go upstairs, Murph. Boy. Alright. So the superior colliculus is is contralateral. Superior colliculus, as we discussed earlier in the semester, has to do with vision. Okay, so this is vision coordination. So what you're looking at to what you're moving toward or away from, or, you know, engaging with movement. So that's why we have the superior colliculus doing contralateral things here to those alpha motor neurons, right? This alpha motor, this end place here is where all those alpha motor neurons are situated, okay? Then we have the vestibular nucleus. This is where information comes from your vestibular sense, being plugged into the medulla, and also getting information to and from the cerebellum. Okay, this helps with balance. This is bilateral, as you can tell. So you have the vestibular nucleus right here and right here, and that both then gets bilateral because you have two ears, right? And so you have two vestibular tubes that are connected to both of your cochleas, and so you have that information converging on the vestibular nucleus to maintain your balance. But the information that you get from the vestibular nucleus is actually head position, not balance. Having your head knowing where your head is in space is incredibly important for maintaining your balance. So that's why when you are spinning round, you get dizzy, because you actually don't know where your head is in space, because of all of the fluid inside the vestibular tubes are sloshing back and forth because you've stopped spinning. So centripetal force had the liquid plastered against the sides of the tubes, and then when you stop spinning, they slosh back and forth. That's why you're dizzy. That's why you can't coordinate your movements. That's why it's incredibly hilarious when people do the baseball bat thing and then they try to swing and they fall over, especially when you're drunk and you try to do the baseball bat thing and you swing and you're like fall over. You're laughing because you know it's true. You know it's true. The last thing is the reticular formation. This gets lots of, and so this is by the way ipsilateral. Okay, it gets information about the world as well. Okay, and it's right next to, you can see here, it's right there. I don't like where the blue dot is, but it's like right here next to the vestibular nucleus, reticular formation. Reticular formation is involved in making sure that you go to sleep. Go to sleep, go to sleep, go to sleep. Gets information from your eyes about light, that sort of thing. Basal ganglia, like I mentioned in the flowchart, is very important for movement, and we're going to see that in just a second when we talk about the deficits to basal ganglia working. And so basal ganglia has been implicated in two of the deficits that we're going to talk about, two of the deficits that you may have seen in the book, Parkinson's and Huntington's diseases, okay, which are similar but different, okay, but they both have basal ganglia implications. So one of the things I wanted to mention with that is the basal ganglia and the cerebellum. I don't know, I should have put basal ganglia and cerebellum on this slide. I just realized that. So the cerebellum and basal ganglia. So here's what they're useful for. Subcortical, of course, we're not talking about the cortex yet, okay? So in the basal ganglia, we have the caudate nucleus and the putamen. This is called the striatum, okay? So you might actually just see it listed as the striatum, okay? On the other side, on both sides of that loop, you have the globus pallidus, GP, okay? The subthalamic nucleus, or subthalamic, depending on how you want to pronounce it. Subthalamic or subthalamic nucleus. And then connected to the SN is the other SN, the substantia nigra. Okay. The substantia nigra. So that is the basal ganglia. Attached then to this are other features that we haven't, so here's the caudate nucleus that goes up and around. Okay, attached to the caudate nucleus that we've discussed extensively is the hippocampus, and attached to the hippocampus is the amygdala, right? So, but they're not part of the basal ganglia, but they're connected to it. So we have the caudate nucleus and the putamen. We have two of each. Okay, Brian would show this real well. Okay. In between this is the thalamus, which is not pictured. Okay. And so sort of posterior to the putamen is the globus pallidus. Posterior to that, subthalamic nucleus. Posterior to that is the substantia nigra. Okay. And then we have the cerebellum, which is essentially connected to the midbrain. Okay. Most of the deep cerebellar nuclei are deep, obviously, and that's where most of the output originates and then is connected to the midbrain. Okay. So most of the outputs of the basal ganglia go to the primary motor cortex. Okay. And most of the inputs are from pretty much everything else. Pretty much everywhere else. All regions of the cortex, as we've discussed throughout the semester, come into the basal ganglia. But most of the outputs actually just go to the motor cortex. Which is interesting. As you become proficient in behavior, so you're learning how to do something, right? And so you've got the hippocampus active because it's learning new techniques. You're creating episodes and semantic semantic memories of that information. As soon as you become proficient on it, so like riding a bike, you have to remember, okay, I have to maintain my balance. I have to pedal. These are all explicit, right? These are all explicit ways of learning riding the bike. But eventually you become really explicit. You become really good at it. You become proficient at it. That changes it to implicit learning. That changes it to an implicit memory. The basal ganglia now takes control over the production of that firing. Okay, so the outputs again to the motor cortex because you don't need to think about it anymore. You just do it. That becomes implicit, right? Damage to the basal ganglia and or cerebellum creates issues with movement. Okay, as we'll see when we talk about Parkinson's and Huntington's. And if you damage the caudate nucleus specifically, caudate nucleus is the blue thing, okay, or the putamen, this has been done in rats, then the rats cannot respond to operant conditioning. Things like reinforcement and punishment. They won't respond to it, so they won't learn that reinforcement is good and they should increase their behaviors, and they won't learn that punishment is bad and they won't decrease their behaviors associated with it. They'll keep getting punished. So if we're going to talk about learning in an implicit sense, you need these two structures for that, because first you recognize that, okay, so if I press the lever, I get a piece of food. That's reinforcing, that's rewarding. I like that. I like that food. Once you become proficient at pressing the lever, when you see the light turn on, then you're like, okay, I got this. I can do that. Light goes on, press lever, I get food. Hell yeah. That's because the basal ganglia took over the proficiency of the motor movements. You just do them. Okay? Now, we're talking about more complex behaviors that are seen in humans, but generally speaking, this is the case. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. Basal ganglia is needed for lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of things. There we go. So this is how it's wired. There's a lot of stuff to talk about. Okay, So you see that the cortex sends information to the substantia nigra. Oh, no, sorry. That's the STN is subthalamic nucleus. My bad. SN is substantia nigra. That's right. But it also will then send information to the brainstem and spinal cord directly. It also sends information to the striatum, which is the caudate nucleus, and the putamen. Okay, so they're both in there. Okay. We have the indirect pathways that operate the globus pallidus, which is GP, the subthalamic nucleus. These are inhibitory to all of these, except the subthalamic nucleus, once told by the globus pallidus to stop, it tells the globus pallidus to then go, which then tells the substantia nigra to tell other areas to stop. I mean, it's pretty complex, right? I'm not going to go through all of it. But when you have Huntington's and Parkinson's, these are disorders, okay? So you have to kind of look at the thicker bars here, versus, or the thinness of the bar. So the thickness of the bars actually shows you what's happening here. So in Huntington's disease, and so if you're not familiar with Huntington's disease, there's a gene called the Huntington gene, named for the folks that found it. Okay. What happens is, there's a mutation in this gene, and it's a recessive gene, of course. There is the indirect pathway, right? So we have this indirect pathway here, which from the striatum to the globus pallidus is here, right? It's inhibitory. That's a problem, okay? Because you see that it's lessened here. It's lessened here, which means that this tells all of this to shush. So it's a cascade effect, right? So the striatum doesn't tell the GPE to cool its jets. And so the GPE continues to send out massive amounts of inhibitory information to other parts of the basal ganglia, the globus pallidus, and the subthalamic nucleus, okay? Which manifests in decreased cognitive capacity, memory function, and motor function. People end up with personality issues and dementia, okay? Coriform movements leading to severe impairment and death within 12 years, okay? Hypokinesia, dyskinesia. So hypokinesia is less movement. Dyskinesia is just kind of uncoordinated movement. Bolisms and hemibolisms. And what ends up happening is the striatum ends up deteriorating. 90% will end up deteriorating over time, which is why most people die within 12 years from Huntington's. It's pretty gnarly. Okay. Less gnarly, but also sucky, is Parkinson's disease. Okay. So let's compare Parkinson's here to a neurotypical functioning basal ganglia. So we have information from the cortex. However, the information from the cortex is not enough. Okay? It's not enough. But you might also detect that the striatum is sending way too much inhibitory messages to the globus pallidus, which then reduces its inhibition of the subthalamic nucleus and the other part of the globus pallidus, which is too excitatory, and then inhibitory to the thalamus, which then is, as far as a feedback loop goes, is less excitatory. There's also no substantia nigra information that's feedbacking to the striatum. Okay, so what this ends up becoming is the tremors that you see that are that are characteristic of Parkinson's. You've probably seen a number of Parkinson's people, especially famous people like Muhammad Ali, Michael J. Fox, right? These people had Parkinson's disease. Muhammad Ali is no longer with us. Michael J. Fox is still trying to do it. What happens here is that the cortex and other parts of the dopaminergic tract from the substantia nigra, because that's where dopamine gets made in the SN, it's not sending information. You can see that the SNC is not telling the striatum, here's your dopamine. So it, generally speaking, is because of dopamine imbalance. Okay? There's no... So you see the SNC here, the SNC here, sending excitatory and inhibitory messages. That's a bunch of dopamine. Okay? That's generally the case here for Huntington's. That's not a problem. There's enough dopamine in the striatum. It's just that the striatum cells then have an issue with the globus pallidus. Here, we have no dopaminergic pathways. They are missing. They should put a big question mark here, right? They are missing. Where have they gone? Well, that ends up creating this awful feedback loop that, generally speaking, is not enough information to the spinal cord for proper and smooth motor movements. And so that's why you get resting tremors, you get bradykinesia, akinesia, difficulty initiating movements, difficulty breathing. Reflexes might be normal because we actually don't need this system for reflexes, as we just saw, right? Interesting set of therapy involves removing the globus pallidus to redirect some of the dopamine that's generated elsewhere to reduce this negative feedback loop, right? This over-inhibitory feedback loop, right? So this is an over-inhibitory feedback loop. Not enough information is getting to the cortex to generate a response, okay? In Huntington's, it's an under-inhibitory, an over-excitatory feedback loop, okay? So that's the difference between the two. They are, generally speaking, very similar, except since it's a feedback loop that we're talking about, we have over-excitatory or under-inhibitory, or over-inhibitory, under-excitatory, right? They're opposites of the same coin, okay? So Huntington's and Parkinson's disease has to do with deficits to the basal ganglia. Did I finish my thought about removing the globus pallidus will alleviate some symptoms of Parkinson's disease? If you remove the GP, because that takes away this, so that allows the STN and thalamus to then work properly to inhibit the thalamus, which is less inhibition of the thalamus, which then sends more excitation to the cortex, which then would send more excitation. I get where they're coming from on that one. It seems pretty rough. That's some significant brain surgery. So the basal ganglia has been considered, or has been metaphorically attributed to a dam of many rivers. Okay, so the cortex is where the rivers originate, and the basal ganglia is the dam. And so it has all of these possible responses until one active response is needed. Okay, that is the overflow, and that allows then, so after this is the response, right? So the cortex sends the most active response that is occurring at the basal ganglia to then be action. It's pretty cool. Pretty cool model. Let's talk about the brain. talk about the brain as we, wow. I spent way too much on the basal ganglia. Alright. Primary motor cortex and association motor cortex. I'm going to sort of breeze through this. PMC is short for, primary motor cortex. It is not M1, because M1 is the primary motor cortex. Sorry, PMC is premotor cortex. What am I talking about? Oh my goodness. PMC is pre-motor cortex. So M1 is primary motor cortex, hence the name M1. I just got my I don't like how they are active. But anyways, that is the precentral gyrus. Precentral gyrus, because this is the central sulcus, right? So this is the precentral gyrus. This is all of the frontal lobe, right? Because this is the parietal lobe. So this is the frontal lobe. Area M1 is the primary motor cortex. This is where most information comes. It, as you can see, has a significant medial surface to it, which connects to the posterior cingulate of the cingulate gyrus, which we've talked about consistently. Okay. Then we have the premotor cortex, which is connected to M1. Okay. We also have the SMA, which is right here. Okay. Which is the supplementary motor area, which is part of the, so AMA, which is all of these, okay? The AMA, supplementary motor cortex, premotor cortex, which is boom and boom. I think the dotted line is separating SMA from PMC. And the posterior parietal cortexes, which are area 5 and 7. I think the dotted line is separating them there. So all of those are involved in planning, control, execution of voluntary movement, as well as other things. I can go on and on and on and on and on about what PMC does, what AMA does, but I think you can read that for yourself. There are 2 streams, or 3 streams actually. Much like everything else. So primary visual cortex, ventral stream, we've already talked about the infratemporal lobe, so that's object recognition. Okay, the ventrodorsal stream goes to the premotor cortex. Okay, and the dorsodorsal stream, okay, so that's the very tippity top stream, goes into the premotor cortex, and as well as the parietal lobe areas for coordination of movement. And we talked about ataxia when we were talking about visual deficits. And so if you remember, ataxia was the old woman trying to grab the pen, right? She was trying to grab the pen and she couldn't grab the pen because she was ataxic, right? So that was coordination of vision and movement. And so that is the where you end up with lesions along these sides, right? Dorsal stream is optic ataxia. Ventral dorsal is apraxia. Okay, and go back to those lectures if you want to remember what each of those were. Yes, I did want to show you where motor movements and motor controls come from. So Brown, who was Sherrington's student, and if you don't know who Sherrington is, that's fine. Sherrington was the guy, one of the guys who determined the actions of neurons, like action potentials. Okay. So his grad student found that animals could generate walking patterns without any sensory feedback. And so what he called it way back when, early 20th century, he called it rhythmic patterns. And these rhythmic patterns are generated by central pattern generators, groups of cells that create these patterns over and over and over again, which is why if you do not suffer brain trauma, will not forget how to walk. That's a caveat. There's an asterisk there that, no brain trauma, right? Because these cells produce these motor patterns that are rhythmic. You can also consider breathing to be a rhythmic pattern. And so while I talk about this, I'm going to let you guys watch this breathstroke, or talking about the breathstroke, or showing the breathstroke.
Take your marks. Go.
And not in
pikes.
in water. I think this is amazing because he's doing those movements, right? That's what he's doing. Generating. Wow, this is some. All right, well.
Breaststroke. Good mornings.
I like his use of green screens and stuff. This is actually pretty cool. So these are rhythmic patterns. Breathing, flying in animals that can fly, swimming. He is swimming in the absence of being water. I thought that was pretty. I'm like, what could I show for rhythmic patterns? Oh yeah, a dude swimming not in water.
5 push-ups.
It's all about humanity.
So you do these exercises outside of water to get the same movements that you would in the water. And I think it's really cool. So that's what rhythmic patterning is. So there's the breaststroke. There it is. There it is, the breaststroke you know and love. Yeah, buddy. It's music, man.
Bent over breaststroke, left leg.
Alright, that's enough of you. Okay. Now we're back to the actual music. What else did I want to say about this? Okay, I guess not. I think I just want to end with I think I just want to talk about brain-machine interfacing for the rest of this. We don't need the rest of it. We don't need the rest of it. Because it's almost time to end, and I'm not going to talk about any of this stuff on Thursday. So I did want to talk about brain-machine interfacing because I think it's pretty cool. So we're reaching a point in our technology and our understanding of how the brain works, where we can take machines and incorporate them into our bodies to assist our bodies. So this is an early brain-machine interface by MN. The MN is the gentleman here. I believe he is quadriplegic. And I think he requires the use of a breathing tube. I think that's what this blue thing is. So think of Christopher Reeve, maybe, if you're familiar with Christopher Reeve's horse riding accident, right? So there's a giant, because you can tell by how old some of this is, right? It's not that old, I mean, but he has a controller in his head. And a chip was implanted in a specific part of his brain. You can see here. So that was there. So he had brain surgery to implant the chip. Okay. And then these electrodes are then implanted in the skull. And that is connected to a controller, which is connected to a computing device. Here we have just a prototype of it all. So he's connected to a giant computer here. And essentially, all they want him to do in this task is think about moving in that direction with his head forward. Okay? And so that's what this line is. This line is the onset cue for him to think about moving in this direction, right? So this is moving forward, this is moving backward, right? Backward. So head forward, but moving backward. Moving to the left, moving to the right, right? And so you can see that moving to the right gives this giant increase in voltage, okay? And that is because of where it is. It's on his left, it's in his left hemisphere, and he's going to be moving to the right, and so he's going to be engaging more rightward oriented muscles, right? He's going to move his leg, his right leg, and all of that. And so that's where you can see this connection. That is crucial for the connection between machine and man, right? And so this idea is leading to awesome advances in prosthetics. Can we go to it, please? There we go. Awesome advances in prosthetics. And one of the focuses is in arm and hand prosthetics. So I wanted to show this quick New Yorker piece, which a guy was a guy who was an amputee is testing out a robotic arm that has electrodes attached to where the amputation is, as well as his brain, and he can control individual movements of the fingers. And specifically, one thing that amputees really need is gripping, being able to grip. Either a gross grip, which is all hands and thumb, or excuse me, all fingers and thumb, but also a fine grip, being able to just do index finger or ring finger, middle finger to thumb, right? Fine grips. So let me play this piece. It's about 3 minutes from the New Yorker, the magazine.
Depending on what electrode they stimulate on, there are different sensations I can feel across different points on my hand. So sometimes it's pressure, sometimes it's just a tingle, warmth. The first time it was really cool.
Look at that.
It's kind of like, did that really just happen?
So that's the receiver.
No, it's just second
He's got a
nature.
couple of them implanted in his head. Imagine
When I
those
was 18,
things.
I was in a car accident and broke my neck. So now I'm a C5 quadriplegic. When I was in the hospital in
C5
Pittsburgh,
cervical.
they put me on a
Fifth
research
vertebra.
registry. So they gave me a call and were like, hey, we think you might be interested in this. I was like, yeah, robots are cool. So
Robots are cool if they're not harming us. University of Pittsburgh.
Nathan
Pittsburgh.
first volunteered for surgery, so he had to go in and have neurosurgery and spend a week in the hospital. After he recovered from the neurosurgery, he's pretty much been coming here 3 times a week. He spends 4 or 5 hours here each time he comes.
He has been implanted with microelectrode arrays in his motor and somatosensory cortex. You can see that we're recording neural signals from the motor cortex, and we are decoding these signals so that you can control a robotic arm.
This is
Essentially, he thinks
so
about
cool to
moving
me.
his arm, moving his hand. And so different neurons will be more or less active as he thinks about moving in different directions. And as we record from a whole population of those
So
neurons,
cool.
we can essentially decode which direction he's thinking about, whether he's thinking about opening or closing the hand, moving his wrist, and turn that into a control signal for the robot.
That's also really cool. Touch sensors in that? Like, what? And now they're timing him and see how he can do various motor
He
tasks
wants
with
to
his
help other
hand.
people.
Right,
Everybody
so-
in the room who's testing Nathan, everybody who's been involved in this project has as a goal to cure paralysis in one form or another.
So this one is like,
Very
you know,
beginning, he said, if no one does this, then work won't advance.
yeah.
I hope
So-
that when people have a traumatic injury, that they
Trying to
don't
grab
feel
that.
like their lives are ruined, that one day there will be cures.
Trying to
for
move
a spinal cord
things.
injury.
They put it back.
You
Trying to move
have
things
lost
again.
something, you can get one that's maybe even better than the one you had before.
This is so cool. We are almost there, everyone. We are almost there. And that's really cool because this is just leading us to the singularity, as so is predicted, that where human and machine and computer are one, right? That's why it's called the singularity. So yeah. Anyways, anywho, that's where we're gonna leave this semester. That's where we're gonna leave it. Review and such on Thursday. So same time, same place, everyone. But we are gonna leave. We're gonna leave that there, and